Ember Witch. Book 1. The Lich. Volume 1. Black Tragedy. Chapter 2. The Nightmare Begins. September 8, 457 to October 17, 458 BME. Fragment 10. The Black Family. Syrya had been on the road for 2 weeks. The flat plains north of Meridia were beautiful but boring. The edge of the forest to the north was strangely beautiful yet haunting. She could feel the power emanating from the trees, but it was distant. She had heard that the deeper you get into the forest, the greater the power grows, but anyone who has ventured too far has always been turned around and end up right where they started. It was as if the forest didn't want anyone to find its secrets. She was approaching a small settlement and planned on making a stop to rest and ask directions. She had a small map scribbled on a paper, but it wasn't very detailed, so she had to rely on the locals to get her to her destination. She rolled up to a small building just on the outskirts of town. She stopped her horse, got off it and tied it to a fence. She approached the door and knocked. A young boy opened the door. He was about 3 feet tall, wearing a baggy shirt with several holes in it.
"Excuse me, young man, is your mother or father here?"
Syrya asked in a friendly tone.
"Daddy is off building a castle, but my mom is here,"
he said, looking down at the ground. Syrya could tell he was a bit upset by her question, so she smiled at him, trying to push the conversation away from it.
"Could I speak with her, please?"
she asked.
"Mama Red Lady is here,"
he yelled out.
"A what?"
a woman replied from inside.
"A Red Lady, she wants to speak to you,"
he said back, walking into the home. A moment later an older woman came to the door holding a bowl full of oats and a wooden spoon. She stopped in her tracks and nearly dropped the bowl.
"Excuse me, I just wasn't expecting to see an elf in these parts,"
the woman said, trying to save face.
"It's okay, I get that a lot,"
Syrya said, pushing it off.
"I'm in need of directions and I was hoping you could help,"
Syrya said as she pulled the map out of her robe pocket and showed it to the woman.
"Oh yes, I know where that is, it's just up the road. The map is a bit outdated by now as the town has grown a bit in the past few years,"
the woman said, pointing up the road.
"Thank you, ma'am. May the gods smile upon you and your family,"
Syrya said, smiling. She waved to the boy now staring out the window, untied her horse, then started riding up the road. Lilith and Ares were sitting in the kitchen waiting for food while Eve was finishing the meal. Eve set 3 plates down on the table, then sat down. They began eating and were disturbed a few minutes later by a knock on the door. Eve stood up, walked to the door, and opened it to see a white-robed, red-skinned woman standing there.
"Hello, madam, I am here on behalf of the Chapel of Creation. We received a letter from this home,"
the woman said calmly.
Yes, come in, take a seat, make yourself at home, I will get my children,"
Eve said, showing her way into the small home. Syrya entered and looked around with curiosity as she could feel 2 distinct sources of magic in the home. Small but still there, each magical energy hummed in her senses like silent songs. She sat on a chair in the front room waiting for the 3 family members to sit. Eve got a twinge in her neck as she began to feel uneasy and slightly angry. Pushing it off, she gathered her kids and led them to the living room.
"Come and sit, girls,"
she said, putting them in front of Syrya. Lilith entered the room and smelled a unique perfume wafting in the air. She sat down and looked up at the woman sitting in her reading chair. Her eyes wandered from the woman's hair to her small white horns protruding from her head, then down to her eyes. She struggled to take her eyes off the woman as she let them wander down to her lips. She swallowed a bit of saliva as her face burned from just the sight of her.
"Let's start at the beginning, okay? My name is Syrya Vern. I am an elven mage and priest of the Church of Creation. I am here to ask you a few questions. Is that okay? Girls, I want you to answer as best as you can,"
Eve said, and her kids nodded.
"I'll start with you since you are the mother. In your letter you stated you have had uneasy feelings. Can you describe these feelings for me?
Syrya said, pulling out an inkwell, quill and pad of paper from her pocket.
It started sometime after my husband went off to Meridia to help build the city. I began waking from nightmares in the middle of the night. Thing is that it's been the same nightmare every time. I can't remember the whole dream, only parts of it. I recall a body lying on the floor with a pool of blood under it. It's from my perspective, and when I look down there is a black blade still covered in blood.
Eve said, trying not to let her fear show.
That's not very common among humans, but it is a trait of those magically blessed. Most mages claim it could be a vision of the future or a glimpse into the past, but we have not been able to pin down if it is or not.
Syrya said, puzzled.
From my knowledge, humans can't use magic, but there have been reports of very rare cases in which they can, although these reports are ages old. It only happens once every few hundred years.
She continued.
I've only heard stories of magic. I didn't really believe in it until recently after I touched that note,
Eve said, trailing off in a trance-like state.
The note will be addressed once I get a little more information, I assure you,
Syrya said after writing down all she was told.
Now tell me about these feelings you get when you look upon Never,
she said, calmly.
Yes. I get the feeling I'm being watched. As if someone or something is staring at me with ill intent. My daughter has had the same feelings,
Eve said, motioning to Lilith.
I see. And tell me about this image you saw after touching the note,
Syrya said, writing down more on her papers.
I saw a woman sitting on a throne. She had a grin on her face so sinister that it gives me chills just recalling it,
Eve said, covering her chest with her arms.
Anything else?
Syrya asked.
No, just the grin,
Eve replied.
Thank you. Now I will ask you some questions, okay?
She said to Lilith.
Okay.
Have you been waking up in the night?
Yes, I have. My dreams are different from Mum's. I see a body laying in a river. It's sitting on a rock with the water running over it. There is a black knife in its hands and I heard voices. It asked me if I had the blade and I answered yes. Then it asked if I have the child of black and again I say yes,
Lilith said, getting nervous as she spoke. Syrya wrote everything she could down on her papers, then set her eyes back on the young woman.
Anything else?
No. Well, actually I started having these dreams after I read the note in my book,
she said after a moment.
A book, you say? May I see this book?
Syrya asked.
Yes, here it is,
Lilith said, then stood up and walked into her room. She grabbed the book, then brought it out to Syrya, who began to flip through the pages slowly.
Ah, I see you are a fan of Farron. She is one of my favorite authors as well. Many Elven have these books in my homeland,
Syrya said with a smile.
It might explain where the page came from if this was imported from Sin's garden,
she thought.
Where was the note located in the book?
She asked.
It was in the back of it. I hadn't started reading the book and I saw a page that was sticking out of the bottom, so I opened to the last page and it was sitting there,
Lilith said.
So whoever had this book last must have hidden it there to keep it away from themselves,
Syrya thought while writing more.
How long have you been having the feeling of being watched by the moon?
She asked.
A few weeks now. It's hard to sleep and I'm afraid to go outside at night,
Lilith answered with a bit of fear. Syrya wrote that down and pondered over her writing for a moment.
Okay, now have you seen this lady on the throne?
She asked.
No, but it's what was written on the note,
Lilith answered.
All right, now on to you, sweetheart,
Syrya said, looking over to Ares after writing down Lilith's answer.
Can you tell me if you have seen anything in your dreams?
She asked.
No, I haven't had any bad dreams,
Ares answered quickly.
What about a woman on a throne?
Syrya asked.
No, I thought I heard someone one night, but it was just Lily talking in her sleep,
Ares said, looking over to her sister.
Anything else you see or feel?
Syrya asked.
Nope, I haven't seen anything,
Ares said calmly.
Okay, then I think that's enough questions for now. Ma'am, could you bring this note to me?
Syrya asked.
Of course, and it's Eve. We got so distracted that I forgot to tell you my name,
Eve said, getting up trying not to let her sickness show. She walked into her room, grabbed the lockbox from under her bed and brought it out to the living room. She set it down on a table, reached into her shirt and pulled a key out from her breasts. She unlatched the chain from her neck and then relatched it so as to not lose the gemstone and key from it. Syrya felt a spike of energy as the box was set down and a second one when the gemstone was exposed. She took note of the spikes, but didn't say anything. Eve unlocked the box and opened it.
I'll let you handle it as it still scares me,
Eve said, walking away from the box, but leaving the necklace with the key by it. Syrya stood up and looked at the folded paper in the box. She felt uneasy as she examined it. She pulled magic to her glowing black and prepared to grab the paper. She reached her hand out and felt a shock of energy pulse through her fingers. She flinched in pain but didn't move away from it. She grabbed the page and felt a spike of pain run through her body. She blacked out for a moment as a flash image poured through her eyes. A massive canine figure walked gracefully across an empty plain with a small human girl at its side. A flowing sea of galaxies making up its fur blew in the breeze as the girl embraced the beast in her arms. She flashed back to reality and shook her head, then opened the page and began reading. She frowned and started to tear up. She placed the page down in the box, closed the lid and locked it quickly. As she grabbed the chain necklace, she had another flash image appear in her eyes. A large stag with 12-point antlers stood in a clearing as it watched over a bear and its cubs move into the forest. It washed away quickly, and she sat down, letting the black aura fade away from her skin. Ares stared in awe as she watched the mage glow before her. The black aura illuminating the room despite its dark hue.
Eve, I must take this back to Meridia with me. This is an artifact from an old elven tome that I thought had been destroyed long ago. I will be needing the key as well,
Syrya said after a moment of rest.
You may take the key, but please leave the gemstone with me. It's the only thing I have left from my husband since he left,
Eve said in response.
I can't let you keep this. It has been tainted by the magic that has affected your family,
Syrya said, trying not to sound offensive.
It's probably why you have been having nightmares more than your children,
Syrya said, and Eve looked to her with a face of pure sadness.
Please, I don't want to lose this. It was my wedding gift,
Eve cried out, getting agitated. That twinge in her neck came back and she had a feeling of hatred in her.
Eve, listen, magic is a powerful thing. Those not trained in handling it can go mad. They can lose their sanity in a matter of seconds. It's extremely rare for a human to be exposed to magic in such quantities as you and your family have been. I need to take this to have it examined. I can send it back to you as soon as I know it's not a harm to you and your children,
Syrya said calmly.
Fine, take it,
Eve replied angrily, understanding the situation she was in.
I'm sorry, Eve, I really am, but magic is not to be trifled with. I can attest to that, as I lit the chapel on fire once or twice,
Syrya said as she picked up her papers and wrote down everything she experienced. She tucked away her inkwell and quill in her pocket, let the ink dry on the papers, then folded them and tucked them in the other pocket. She stood up, grabbed the necklace and looped it around her head. The green gemstone touched her skin and calmed her nerves. She tucked it in her robe, then picked up the box, feeling the dark energy emanating from it. She pulled magic to her, once again being covered in a black aura, but this time a new source of energy began to draw the magic for her. She looked down and saw a slight green glow illuminated from her breasts. She placed a hand on the top of the lockbox and engulfed it in her black aura. The box shook a bit and then the black aura surrounding it vanished. She turned to the women before her and expanded her color around them.
I have placed a binding spell on each of you. This should keep you from being affected by any magic left in the house after I leave,
she said, then let the aura fade from her and the glow from the gemstone faded as well. She still felt the dark energy, but it was subdued behind her own, making it bearable to carry the box.
I must get going now. Please let me know if there are any new details in the next few weeks. I suggest praying and attending your local church service to help rid yourself of the magic. I will keep in contact with you over the next year and I will return your wedding gift as soon as I can, I promise.
Syrya said, walking toward the door.
I understand, thank you,
Eve said, holding back anger in her voice. Syrya stepped out the door and shuddered at the feelings she had. She began to tear up. Her head was a flurry of emotions and thoughts. She got to her horse, packed the box into her saddlebag, then began riding back to Meridia. Eve closed the door behind Syrya, then leaned her back against it and started to cry.
Mom, are you okay?
Ares asked, walking up to her and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist.
I'm fine, baby, what about you?
Eve asked, trying not to cry anymore.
I'm okay, Mama, why are you crying?
Ares asked, hugging tighter.
I'm afraid, sweetie. I'm afraid.
Eve said tearfully.